available afterward. Everyone's webcams and the ability to share screens, except for myself and other presenters, and some of our staff, have been disabled. Please do not request to have your webcam turned on or your screen shared. You will also be muted for the duration of the meeting, but you should be able to chat with everyone else in the chat box, which you can find by clicking on the chat icon that looks like a little speech bubble on the taskbar at the bottom of your screen. You can also use this chat box to ask questions about anything on the agenda or if you're having any tech issues. You should also be able to privately message our staff member, Mark Hozak, who's providing tech support if you need it. You've also have the option to call or email the tech support line. Our staff member, Leila Toledo, will be monitoring those requests. If you're on the phone or have any issues using the chat box or typing out your question, we will be asking you to raise your hand so we can unmute you. To raise your hand, click on the participants icon on your taskbar and select Raise Hand. For folks on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. If you're on a computer and having any audio issues, you can switch to phone audio by clicking on the arrow next to the microphone icon and selecting Leave Computer Audio. Then click Phone Call for dial-in info and select the flag for your country's dial-in number. You can also rename yourself by clicking on the 3 dots near your name and selecting Rename. You can use this to add your pronouns if you haven't already, but please don't remove your first or last name. For voting process to run smoothly, we need to be able to see your full name. If any attendees are not eligible to vote, you will be moved to the waiting room during voting. The presenters will also be doing their best to describe the slides on the PowerPoint presentation as they change for folks who may be unable to see them. This is our first time holding our AGM virtually, and we have tried our best to make the process as smooth as possible and be as accessible as possible for folks. But please forgive us if we run into any issues. We will try to resolve them as quickly as possible. We'll also be circulating a feedback survey afterwards so we can improve our future online events. And finally, I would like to ask everyone to be respectful and patient with each other as we move through the items on our agenda tonight. So we're going to begin the formal business of the AGM. This current slide reads, Opening Remarks, Kaylee DePuma, Board President and Chair. Welcome to the 2020 Annual General Meeting of the BC Civil Liberties Association. For more than 55 years, the association has been fighting for greater equality, liberty, freedom, and justice. The BC Civil Liberties Association is one of Canada's leading social and democratic justice not-for-profit organizations, with a mandate that includes work on police accountability, government transparency, voting rights, prisoners' rights, national security issues, equality, and women's rights. We are one of the most visible and active advocacy groups in Canada. Our mandate is to promote, defend, sustain, and extend human rights and civil liberties, and we accomplish this through public education, policy advocacy, direct assistance to individuals, and litigation. During the pandemic, our work has shifted to monitoring the government's response to COVID-19, to guard against undue encroachment of our civil liberties, and to ensure that no one is left behind in our response to the pandemic. Many of you on the call or online with us tonight have been a part of the association for decades. You are a valued part of our association, and we thank you for your stalwart support. For those new faces, thank you for being here. We very much hope that you'll join us in our work. A quick overview of tonight's activities. We will begin with our AGM business. Before each vote, we will afford everyone online and on the call a chance to ask questions and clarification before voting begins. We will only be dealing with business on the agenda this evening. After our formal AGM business, BCCLA Executive Director Harsha Walia will brief you on our 2019 highlights of our work. Before we begin the formal business, I would like to announce the results of our board election for 2020. We received 7 nominations for 7 available seats, As a result, our board candidates will be elected directors by acclamation as of the end of this AGM tonight. Please join me in congratulating the following candidates: Lindsay Bertrand, Ian Bushfield, Joey Doyle, Lisa Kerr, Lindsay Lister, Steve Savitt, and Vanessa Wolf. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank two outgoing board members, Richard Marcuse and John Levitt. Please join me in thanking them for their many years of service to their BCCLA and their passion and dedication to the work of human rights and civil liberties. Both of them were friends of the association long before they joined our board. Our community has been made stronger because of their efforts, and we hope that they continue to stay involved in our work for many years to come. Thank you. Now we will move on to the main business of our AGM. I will reiterate that we will only be dealing with business on the agenda this evening. So this slide reads approval of the minutes of the last AGM, May 8th, 2019. This is our first agenda item this evening. The 2019 AGM minutes were sent to all members by email in advance of this meeting. They can be found on page 3 of your document package. Are there any questions, comments, or corrections? Just as a reminder, you can use either the chat box or raise your hand now if you would like to be unmuted. A request to unmute will pop up on your screen, and a reminder to those on the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand.
Kaylee, I'm not seeing any questions in the comments or any hands raised.
Thank you, Jesse. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the May 8th, 2019 annual general meeting? To make a motion or second a motion, please use the chat function.
Kaylee, I have a motion from Paul Tetro. And I have a second from Ian Bushfield.
Thank you, Ian and Paul. We will now begin by launching a poll for you to vote on the approval of the minutes. In a second, a window will pop up and folks connecting via their computer can cast their vote. For folks on the phone, you will be moved to a separate breakout room with our Director of Operations and People, where she will unmute you and record your vote. Non-members will be transferred to the waiting room during the voting, but will be brought back in for the results and before we proceed to the next agenda item. You now have 1 minute to enter your vote. Please vote now. With 28 votes in favor, none against, and 3 abstaining, the motion to approve the minutes of the May 8th, 2019 AGM has passed. We're moving on now to the AGM agenda. This slide reads AGM agenda, call to order, Kaylee DePuma, President and Chair, approval of the minutes of the last AGM, May 8th, 2019, approval of the agenda, and so on. The agenda was sent to all members by email in advance of this meeting. You can find the agenda on page 1 of your document package. Are there any questions, comments, or corrections? Raise your hand now if you would like to be unmuted.
Kaylee, I don't see any questions in the chat and I do not see any hands raised.
Thank you, Jesse. May I have a motion to approve the agenda for the June 18th, 2020 annual general meeting?
David Fay has moved to approve the agenda. And Ian Bushfield has seconded.
Thank you, David and Ian. As a reminder, right now, non-voting members and folks participating on the phone will be moved to a separate breakout room during the voting period. You should see the poll now and have 1 minute to enter your vote. With 31 votes in favor, none against, and 1 abstention, the motion to approve today's agenda has passed. Thank you. We'll move along now to the presentation of tonight's special resolutions. These are 2 bylaw changes that would allow the BCCLA to hold our director elections before the date of the AGM, whether through electronic means or a mail-in ballot, so that voting was not necessary in person at the AGM. The winners of the election would be announced at the AGM and would take office immediately at the conclusion of the meeting. These special resolutions were sent to all members by email in advance of this meeting. You can find them in your document package on page 1. Are there any questions, comments, or corrections? Raise your hand now if you would like to be unmuted.
Keely, I don't see any questions in the chat box, and I do not see any hands raised.
Thank you, Jessie. May I have a motion to vote on the approval of the special resolutions?
I have a move from Paul Schachter, and I have a second from Vanessa Wolf.
Thank you, Paul and Vanessa. We're going to move forward to voting on that motion. As a reminder, right now, non-voting members will be moved to a separate breakout room during the voting period. You should see the poll now, and you have 1 minute to vote. Please vote now. With 30 votes in favor, none against, and 1 abstention, the special resolution to approve amendments to section 6.3 and 7.6 of the BCCLA bylaws has passed. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn it over to an executive committee member of the board, Derek Brackley.
Hello, I'm going to take us through the financial statements and auditor portion of the meeting. And I'd like to just first thank staff who do an excellent job of supporting us on the financial matters. We have completed our financial year ending December 31st, 2019. The audited financial statements were sent to all members by email in advance of this meeting. You can find them in your document package on page 5. Are there any questions, comments, or corrections? Please raise your hand now if you would like to be unmuted.
Derek, I don't see any hands raised, and I do not see any questions in the comments.
Thank you. May I have a motion to receive the audited statements for January 1st to December 31st, 2019?
I have a motion from Vanessa Wolf, and I have a second from Dylan Williams.
Thank you. We will move to voting. Please wait for the box to come up on your screen. And as a reminder, right now, non-voting members and folks participating over the phone will be moved to a separate breakout room. The poll will now pop up on your screen shortly. Okay, the poll should be on your screen now. You have 1 minute to vote. Please vote now. Okay, with 30 votes in favor and none against, with 3 abstentions, the motion to receive the 2019 audited financial statements has passed. So this brings us to the next step, and we are going to the appointment of the auditor for the current year 2020. This is a requirement, and we have used the firm Tompkins, Wasney, Miller and Company for several years. So I would like a motion that the firm of Tompkins, Wasney, Miller and Company be appointed as the BCCLA auditor for 2020. A motion from John Levitt and a second from Ian Bushfield. So as a reminder, right now, non-voting members and folks participating over the phone will be moved to separate breakout rooms for the voting period. And please wait for the poll to pop up on your screen. Okay, you should have the poll on your screen now. Please vote. You have 1 minute to do so. Okay, we have 30 votes in favor, none against, with 3 abstentions. And therefore, the motion to appoint Tompkins, Wasney, Miller and Company as the BCCLA auditors for 2020 has been passed. Thank you very much, and I will pass the baton back to Kaylee.
Thank you, Derek. This brings us to the end of the formal portion of our AGM business. And I now want to welcome BCCLA Executive Director Harsha Walia to provide us with the highlights of BCCLA's work from 2019 and an overview of our current work.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you all for joining us today, all of our members and supporters. My name is Harsha Walia, and it is my honor to be the new Executive Director at the BCCLA. Thank you to all the BCCLA members and supporters for your warm welcome as I join the organization, and all of you who have reached out to introduce yourselves. I look forward to continuing to connect with all of you and to continue to learn from all of you and serve the association. I also want to take a moment to thank our incredible team here who have been working on hosting our first virtual AGM, our engagement and operations team who are organizing all of these logistics and making them seem seamless, but it was in fact quite a heavy lift. So virtual cheer for all of their incredible work. I also want to acknowledge that I'm here on unceded Coast Salish territories, lands of the Homusqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And thank you, Kelly, for that acknowledgement earlier. And just to echo that our work is grounded in the principles of Indigenous self-determination and recognizing Indigenous land and nationhood on all of the territories that our work is conducted on. By way of highlights, I'll begin with some organizational highlights. Our big organizational highlight for 2019 was that we announced our first 5-year strategic plan. That's also what is in front of you there on that slide. And our first 5-year strategic plan articulates a clear vision for the association, a vision that defends and extends the civil liberties and human rights of everyone, while paying particular attention to those who are most oppressed by state power. Also, just by way of a brief overview, our numbers for 2019, that was the slide that was just right there. You can see some of our numbers. We've appeared in 4,974 pieces of media in 2019, so approximately 5,000 pieces of media, and have had over 2,900 event attendees who engaged with and learned about their civil liberties and fundamental human rights through different events and workshops and other avenues of our work. We also had a huge year of transition in 2019. There's a number of new staff that you can see here. I won't read out all of the names, but you can see that it's been a year of excitement in terms of welcoming new staff. So please join me in welcoming all of our new staff as they lead us into our future years. I will move on now to our litigation highlights. And we've had a number of significant developments on the litigation front. In front of you right now is the slide that reads "Justice, Not Torture," which of course is in reference to our solitary confinement case. So last year, our solitary confinement and cross appeal, well, this year they were dropped. So in the middle of last year, in 2019, we received our groundbreaking decision from the BC Court of Appeal, which found that Canada's laws governing solitary confinement are unconstitutional because they permit prolonged, indefinite solitary confinement and fail to provide an independent and external review of segregation placements. We're pleased that the government has now abandoned its fight against the BC Court of Appeal ruling and are no longer appealing to the Supreme Court of Canada. However, we are clear that our fight is not over as the federal government's new legislation continues to permit prolonged solitary confinement by a different name. And the BCCLA will continue to advocate on this issue to ensure Correctional Service of Canada's practices no longer permit solitary confinement, including as we've seen during the pandemic. Second, we have been continuing to advocate for MAID legislation. Since our litigation in Carter, the BCCLA has been advocating for amendments to Canada's medical assistance in dying laws. We achieved a significant victory for Julia Lamb last year when the government finally admitted she was eligible for MAID. The new Bill C7, which was tabled in early 2020, ensures that patients with chronic degenerative conditions have MAID as an option if their suffering becomes intolerable. Also, some patients who are eligible and approved for MAID but who lose capacity before the procedure is provided will have the requirement for final consent waived. However, the new law does add cruel and unnecessary hurdles for other patients, and the BCCLA will continue to advocate for necessary amendments to MAID. On the intervention front, the BCCLA litigated and received judgments on over 25 important cases in 2019. I will just say, in case you didn't hear the significant news today, we also received a fantastic judgment today in an intervention on the Zora case, which affirmed that bail conditions must be consistent with the presumption of innocence. So you can just see the importance of our work continuing on. By way of going back to 2019, some of the highlights on our legal interventions. One of them was challenging indefinite detention of migrants. The Supreme Court of Canada released its judgment into the China case. This is a case that raised the issue of migrants being held in immigration detention for lengthy periods of time, sometimes years, but were only able to challenge their detention through limited avenues. We intervened to argue that habeas corpus, which is a legal provision that allows anyone in custody the right to challenge their detention before a judge, should be available for migrant detainees. The Supreme Court of Canada confirmed that detainees can challenge the lawfulness of their indefinite detention through the writ of habeas corpus. In another case, which is one that we are currently intervening on, which is corporations do not have charter rights. So early this year, in January 2020, the BCCLA argued at the Supreme Court of Canada that the charter right to protection from cruel and unusual punishment and treatment does not apply to corporations. This is certainly one to follow. We've also had a number of interventions protecting freedom of expression. The BCCLA in 2019 intervened in a number of cases to protect freedom of expression, including 3 interventions at the Supreme Court of Canada, one aimed at curbing slap suits, another a case at the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal regarding the censorship of a nurse by her professional body, and a third at the Court of Appeal of Alberta, where we argued that charging huge security fees to student groups violated freedom of expression, and the courts found in a significant judgment that the charter applies to universities. This is just a brief overview of some of our legal interventions. As I mentioned, we had over 25 legal interventions last year, and I'm also happy to announce that in 2020, we are reaching a huge milestone of 100 legal interventions before the Supreme Court of Canada, a vast majority of which are under the skillful supervision of our litigation director, Grace Pastine. On the policy front, in 2019, we released the protest papers. So this was the release of thousands of pages of secret documents disclosed from our spying complaint to the Security Intelligence Review Committee. These protest papers suggest that CSIS illegally spied on the activities of Indigenous groups and environmentalists opposing the Enbridge Northern Gateway pipeline. The spying activity was illegal and created a chilling effect, interfering with charter-protected freedom of expression and association. And in 2020, you will certainly hear more from us on that front. We also continued our advocacy against the unnecessary, arbitrary, illegal, and discriminatory practice of BPD street checks. This is certainly, of course, back in the news as racialized police practices, specifically as they impact Indigenous and Black people, is all over the news and is certainly on the front of many of our minds. In early 2020, the Vancouver Police Department released its new street check policy as required by the new provincial policing standards on police stops. and the Vancouver Police Board also released its independent review of VPD street check data. The BCCLA expressed strong concerns about both, and we're continuing to push for a complete ban on street checks. Third, our campaign against the Community Safety Act. The BCCLA led a coalition against the Community Safety Act, which is a provincial law allowing neighbors to report their suspicions about specified activities to government, triggering a process that can result in a court order for people to vacate their property. Fourth, earlier this year, in response to RCMP enforcement actions at the Ginnungum Checkpoint and Unistoten Camp on Wet'suwet'en territories, the BCCLA, alongside Wet'suwet'en Hereditary Chiefs and the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, filed a public policy complaint with the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission, that's the CRCC. The CRCC chairperson released an unprecedented response pointing to the unlawful nature of RCMP exclusion zones and arbitrary stops and searches, and we continue our work in support of the Wet'suwet'en Nation. Fifth, during the pandemic, you might have seen these, the BCCLA has been part of nationwide efforts to protect the human rights of the most vulnerable, monitoring government measures so we can respond to unreasonable breaches of our civil liberties, and providing educational resources. So that's what you see on your screen there, your rights in a pandemic, fact sheets and resources, where we provided a number of educational resources and fact sheets to inform the public about the scope and enforcement of emergency powers during the pandemic. Our work of monitoring and intervening in issues of civil rights and rights infringements during the pandemic will continue into 2021, as well as a number of other pieces of work we have planned for the upcoming year. If you haven't already, please do sign up to receive email updates so you can remain informed and up to date about all of our work. And thank you so much for your continued support for the BCCLA and for your belief in our mandate to protect civil liberties and human rights for all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Harsha, for updating us all on the work of the BCCLA. Before we close this evening, I want to extend a huge thank you to our staff member, Amy, for taking lead in organizing tonight's event and ensuring its success. Thank you as well to the engagement team, operations team, and volunteers that made our transition from in-person to online as smooth as possible. Most of all, thank you all for attending our online AGM this year. Thank you for your unwavering commitment and for believing in civil liberties and human rights for all. I want to acknowledge that our work is only possible thanks to hundreds of committed members, donors, volunteers, and supporters across the country. Thank you for being such passionate and involved members of our community. We hope to see you again at our next AGM in 2021. May I please have a motion to adjourn our AGM?
Kaylee, I have a motion from Paul Tetreau, and I have a second. Well, I'm still waiting on a second. And seconded by Ian Bushfield.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Vanessa and Ian, and thank you all. Have a wonderful evening and good night.